Ecosystem is a word that means house structure, so to speak, in environmental science. The ecosystem is the main unit that we look at on kind of a more micro level to be able to examine the life and how things work together. So the ecosystem is composed not only of life, it's also composed of all the non-living parts of the environment that help to support life. And so let's talk a little bit about some terminology and a little bit of the structure of the ecosystem so that we can have some commonalities going forward. Ecosystem structure, if you look at a diagram of the ecosystem, everything kind of starts with the sun. The sun is a major provider of energy for nearly all life on Earth. I wouldn't say all life on Earth because we have found some life on Earth that doesn't need the sun for survival, and that life happens to exist off of some of the energy from volcanic extrusions underwater. So let's say about 99+% of all life on Earth needs sunlight to be able to support the ecosystem. So in this particular instance, we're going to talk a little bit about what we call trophic structure. And trophic structure, or trophic means feeding, T-R-O-P-H-I-C, trophic structures are feeding levels within an ecosystem. So let's think about this for a minute. If you're walking through a natural ecosystem, you see plants, you see insects, you see animals, you may see birds, you may see some mammals, etc. How do those all fit together? Well, all those collectively are the life that you see. However, there's some things there that you might not realize are also helping to support that life. Air, the temperature around you, soil nutrition, the moisture surrounding you, the chemistry of that whole place. That all kind of works together as well. So when you're talking about ecosystem structure, we talk about biotic and abiotic factors of ecosystems. Biotic, B-I-O-T-I-C, bio means life. Abio means non-life. So we have the living things and the non-living things within an ecosystem. So we want to put some terms on these so that we know what we're talking about when we say we're talking about consumers, producers, etc. The first term that I would want to mention would be the trophic structure or trophic feeding level. And different things feed at different levels. For instance, you think about a cow. Cow eats grass. Okay? Grass uses sunlight through photosynthesis. Well, the cow is considered to be at one trophic feeding level. The grass is at a different feeding level. So let's look at those and see if we can make sure that we understand how those play into this ecosystem structure. Primary producers is a term that comes up when we're talking about plants. Plants typically get their energy from the sun through photosynthesis. That energy then is available to things that might eat those plants. And as things feed on plants, they gain energy and nutrition from those plants. But producers are also referred to as autotrophs, auto feeders. Again, troph means feeding. So autotrophs are auto feeders. So autotrophs are primary producers, green plants for the most part. Okay, they have a tendency to form the basis of the food chain. Things that feed on primary producers are considered to be consumers. In this case, the first level of animals that feed on plants are considered to be herbivores. They feed on herbs. They feed on plants. They are primary consumers. If something eats a primary consumer, just like it sounds, it is considered to be a secondary consumer. If something feeds on a secondary consumer, it's considered to be a tertiary consumer. And in some food chains, if something's feeding on a tertiary consumer, that would be considered a quaternary consumer, and so on. So some people call those first-degree consumers, second-degree consumers, third-degree consumers. What you're seeing, though, is that plants form the base of the food chain. Something eats the plants, something eats those, something eats those, something eats those. Okay, and we have terms for that. Producers or autotrophs, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, quaternary consumer. Okay. Now you start to wonder about matter and energy. We're going to talk about how matter and energy flow into each other in each of those. But what happens if something dies? What happens to the energy and what happens to the nutrition in something that might die and just lay there in an ecosystem? Well, that brings us to what we call detritivores or detritus feeders. Some people refer to them as detritivores, detritus feeders. Detritus is dead and decaying material that exists within an ecosystem. Detritivores are those things that feed on dead and decaying material. When I think of detritivores, I think of bacteria, fungi, insects that feed on dead and decaying meat, etc. They form a they carry on a very important function in the ecosystem, in that they return nutrition back to the ecosystem. Think about this. If it wasn't for detritivores or decomposers / detritus feeders, anything that ever had died in an ecosystem would still be laying there. I mean, literally, dinosaurs would not have decomposed. A deer would not decompose. An animal or a plant that died would not decompose. So detritivores form a very important function in that they return nutrition back to the environment so that other things can use that nutrition. So in review, primary producers gain energy from the sun. They gain nutrition from the soil, from their surroundings. Primary producers are also known as autotrophs. Autotrophs are fed upon by primary consumers. They're called herbivores. Primary consumers eat primary producers. If something feeds on a primary consumer, it's going to be a carnivore. A carnivore is going to eat herbivores. So they're considered to be secondary consumers. Anything that feeds on a secondary consumer is going to be considered to be a tertiary consumer. Anything that feeds on a tertiary consumer is going to be a quaternary consumer. And all of those things are fed upon by decomposers, detritivores, or detritus feeders. However, whatever term you want to use, those things feed on dead and decaying material and start that process of growth over in the ecosystem. Food chain puts all of this together.